but I would like to introduce Julie, who's a fisheries research biologist and has spent 30 years as an academic professional at the Illinois Natural History Survey. She helped found the Fisheries Conservation Foundation in 2003 in order to directly work with stakeholders and decision makers to promote science-based solutions to stakeholders on native fish and fisheries issues. Her work has included projects in US, Canada, Bahamas, Bhutan, and Thailand, and she is now full-time director of operations for this foundation. She's also very much interested in communication training, including co-directing a Climate Ambassadors and Fellows Communications program. But most interestingly, I was thrilled to find her work on the Golden Mahseer in Bhutan. And I'm really, really looking forward to learning more about this journey this fish makes through the absolutely stunning rugged mountains on Eastern Himalayas. Over to you, Julie.
Thank you, Padma. This is actually very special for me. Linnaeus was a childhood hero of mine. I spent many hours looking at his illustrations when I was young. And so to be able to speak to the Linnean Society is quite an honor. As Padma says, I'm Director of Operations for the Fisheries Conservation Foundation. And I want to give a nod to many of the people that helped make this project possible. The first is David Phillip. He is my husband and research partner, and then many of the people that we worked with in Bhutan. You'll see pictures of them throughout this presentation. So Bhutan, the first thing to really know about Bhutan, it is just a land of contrasts. Wherever you go, you see this amazing array of contrasts. So we'll start at the very top of the country where the Himalayan range borders the northern border. And as you can see, the landscape is just it's just an amazing landscape of layers and mountains. But as you move down to the mid-range of the country, you actually get to more of a tropical, subtropical area where you have jungles and vines and elephants and just a very different landscape. And then in the southern border, you get just a completely different view. So this is looking out over the plains of Assam when you go into India. So right where the mountains end, then India begins. And it is a stark contrast, as you can see, that flat area and then the mountains that rise up. And throughout the country, you see these agricultural areas, just small areas. They do have a variety of crops, but the main one is rice. And so the people there that have lived there for centuries have really learned how to live within this rugged landscape. This is a very typical view of a village. You have the where possible, there is a terraced field, mainly for rice, but for other products as well, and then the forest above. So where are we in the world? Where does this exist? So Bhutan is in a pretty precarious place for a small country. It is surrounded by two giants. It has China to the north and India to the south. And it's really surrounded by India, but then just to the left there is Nepal. So just as a reference point, you've got Mount Everest there, and then you travel over to Bhutan. So another important aspect of Bhutan is that it is a Buddhist kingdom. 95% of its population is Buddhist, and it really is the fabric of their daily life. It's not just a religion, but it is really who they are. And so when you work there and you travel there, this becomes very apparent. They are a culture and a country that really celebrates their heritage. They have many, many festivals, and their traditions are very important to them. If you ever go as a tourist, there's a whole circuit of festivals that cater to tourists. But I think the important thing to know is these festivals aren't held for tourists; they are held for them. They are a really important part of their life. And then there are the temples. So this is the most famous. This is Tiger's Nest, Taksang. It was built in the 1600s and is just, as you can see, an incredible structure. And there are several of these large temples throughout Bhutan that are just massive and stunning against this landscape. But I think it really tells you something about the Bhutanese people and their can-do attitude, that whether it's huge or whether it's small, that these what is seemingly impossible places to build a house of worship, that they will do it. I took this from the airplane and I looked for a road up to this temple. I did not see one. So just to think about how that this is achieved is pretty amazing. But as I said, it really tells you something about the people, the importance of the Buddhism to wherever they are in the country. Now, an important aspect for us in their Buddhism, it's a Tibetan Buddhism, and they have 8 auspicious symbols. And one of these 8 auspicious symbols is the golden fish. And so this religious aspect of the Golden Mahseer is a really interesting conservation issue as well, because it's highly revered. It's a symbol of good luck. And of course, you don't want to be the country that lets your Mahseer populations dwindle when it is such an important religious aspect of their life. And you see these symbols everywhere. They are symbols of good luck. The auspicious symbols are, they're put on bridges, they're put on houses, they are really prominent. So people know about the golden fish. And that is helpful when you're talking about, Mahseer. Now, Bhutan had closed borders until the mid-70s. It really didn't allow travel into the country. And so that has really preserved the cultural traditions and values inside the country. And there are many places you can go in Bhutan that people just don't have contact with the outside. And so here I am in a monastery and showing them pictures of their serna, of the golden fish, and they were so curious. They had never seen the fish in the water, and so I was showing them these pictures. So having this contact is pretty amazing. They do have tourism now. They have a very unique way of handling their tourism. So rather than be like Nepal or India, where you can travel on $5 a day, their concept is high value. So they really cater to tourism that can help build their economy. And you have to, as you can see from the landscape, it's not a place that you can really drive by yourself. And so the whole economy, the tourism economy, is built to support guides, and your coming to the country helps the communities and their economy. Okay, so they do have a government. It's a parliamentary government, but they also have a monarchy, and the royal family is highly revered in this country. So this picture is the 4th king. It's the 4th king abdicating his throne to his son, the 5th king, who is now currently in power. But the 4th king did 2 very important things for the country, and 2 really far-reaching and progressive things. The first is that he instituted the gross national happiness. So in the rest of the world, we have gross national product. In Bhutan, they have gross national happiness. And this is an index to measure the happiness and well-being of the country. And it really guides the country in its progress for sustainable and holistic life. It's a very real thing. There's the Gross National Happiness Commission. There is a true index. Children take happiness classes throughout their education. And so it is a very real and active part of their government. The second thing that the 4th king did is, as part of the Bhutanese constitution, he mandated that 50% of the land had to remain in intact forest. And so, I just think this was an amazing thing for, a far-seeing vision for the country, is that is to put those protected mandates in there. And so currently 56% of the country is under national parks or sanctuaries or biological corridors. And there is a movement to increase that number. And so certainly their land is, their natural resources are a very important part of their life. And this is evident because it is truly a biological hotspot. Their bird life is pretty incredible. I think there's over 670 species. I've sometimes seen the number 700 of birds that have been recorded in the country. So just an incredible amount of bird life. This is a great hornbill. They're pretty common in some parts of the country. And their wildlife is incredible as well. They have, these are golden langurs. I believe there's 4 different species of langurs in the country, but they also have red pandas, takin, wild yaks in the northern part, giant Himalayan squirrels, which I've seen twice and are an incredible animal. So just rich in wildlife. And of course, one of these is the tiger. They have 7 wildcat species, excuse me, 7 wildcat species in the country, but their tiger populations are quite healthy. This is actually a camera trap that it was the first record of a tiger that was high up in elevation in high north. You can see that it is in snow here. And so they're still learning a lot about their wildlife populations. In fact, they now think that the snow leopard and tiger habitats may overlap during some parts of the year. So their research on their wildlife is actually quite progressive and active. They do a yearly elephant count. And so, you know, a lot to be commended for their wildlife activity. And their wildlife is prominent. You know, these pug marks here are, we see them when we travel around working on the rivers there. So, you know, so really, really strong conservation for their terrestrial wildlife. But the rivers are, and the aquatic life, not so much. And this is a good reason why. As you can see, there is, you know, steep mountainsides. You've got a river valley. If you can see on the right, there is the road up there and the river down there. So it's just really difficult to study fish in this river, or in this country. You know, fast moving water, difficult to get to. Here is a map of the major water basins. It is a country that is filled with rivers and tributaries, and many of them flowing out of the Himalayan or the source of in the Himalayan mountains up north. There has been some work to look at the fish biodiversity in the country. This publication came out in 2017. The second sister publication to this may be out now. I'm not sure because of COVID, but it is really the first scientific assessment of species within the river, or within the rivers of Bhutan. And I believe it was 125 species that they have recorded, and that will grow as they continue to work on this. But this work is expensive, and there's very little money in the country to do these biological natural history assessments. And so this is an area that needs attention. You can't protect your biodiversity if you first don't know, you know, what is even in there. And from the crews that go out, you know, it's pretty, the diversity is pretty amazing. So so that is work in progress. But what we do know is that we have the Golden Mahseer. And this is a large migratory species. Its range is really within the Himalayan range, from northern Myanmar, across Bhutan to India, to Nepal, to Pakistan. The Golden Mahseer swims in these rivers. As you can see, it's got a body shape that is just really built for rivers and rapids. They have this incredibly powerful tail, and they navigate a range of conditions in the rivers. So in Bhutan, like many of the other countries in this range, there is a monsoon season where you get drastic changes in water level, in flows, just really massive changes in depth. So you consider how these fish live in this system and not only live in there, but travel and migrate. It's pretty incredible. And they are armored by some pretty large scales. It just every time I see these scales, it's just really quite incredible how large they are. So they are really adapted well for this environment. I also wanted to bring up that in many places within its range, it's really a valuable sport fish and prized especially among the fly fishing crowd. So you get a lot of fly fishers that seek the adventure to go and catch a mahseer, a wild mahseer. And so there is an economic value to this fish. I'll talk about how that relates to Bhutan in a little bit later. So here you have this Shangrila, right? You have this paradise that is, been culturally preserved, where their traditions are valued, and it's this biological hotspot. But progress has found Bhutan. It is a poor nation, and it has very little resources or ways to build its economy, and so hydropower is certainly one of the ways that they can do that. Right now, I think there's 5 dams that are currently online, and certainly plans to build more. Hydropower is the #1 economic driver and resource in the country, and tourism is second. So it's just this juxtaposition of building dams, which can impact the environment, and then tourism, where people come, to see this environment. So really interesting problems, and there is a huge need for balance there as they plan for the future. And so, as many places in Asia, there are just plans to build dams. And as you can see from this map, every dot is some place that's been assessed. So every river in the country has been assessed if there could be a hydropower dam built on it. That doesn't mean there will be, but it's certainly been assessed that way. And so again, this need for balance, it's not that you can't have hydropower, it's a very important resource, but working with with outside viewpoints and perspectives of how to do that more sustainably, and how to do that with impacts that don't, how to do it that have lesser impacts on the aquatic biodiversity is really needed. But dams aren't the only development that's happening. Bhutan is filled with villages that are 4-hour walk to a medical facility, or to educational to schools and education. And so slowly roads are being built and improved, bridges are being built. And of course, anytime you do this can impact rivers and fish populations. So that is a challenge. And then wherever you have development, you need cement, right? And if you have cement, you need sand. And this is a huge conservation issue across the Himalayas, and certainly in Bhutan. So finding ways that you can sustainably produce cement and production is an area that is really needed. And so this is in Bhutan. This is actually one of our study sites. So we had some baseline data before this gravel crushing plant was put in, and it was highly impacted. So again, lots of need to raise awareness on the impacts of this. And then the last thread I'll talk about is illegal fishing. So in Bhutan, all fishing is illegal, all forms of it, whether it's fishing for food or fishing for regulation, without a permit. You can get a permit, but that is needed. But that doesn't mean that illegal fishing doesn't happen. It's a paradox with their Buddhist culture and their Buddhist beliefs. But hunger wins out, right? The need for protein usually wins out. And so this is a very easy resource for people to go down and fish. And all forms of gill netting is illegal. So when you find a gill net, it's just illegal fishing. That's never allowed. And we find a lot of gill nets out on the river. And of course, mahseer are very vulnerable to this because of their because of their migratory behavior. And so this is an area that certainly needs attention within the country. So Bhutan has some big questions, right? What is the status of their fish, right? So there's been no surveys, monitoring, or sampling that really give an idea. All you know is if you see fish swimming by in the river or that have collected, that are staging at the tributaries. So very little information known about its status. And then impacts. What are the impacts of these developments? How will dams impact a migratory population? What can they do to be forward thinking about these impacts, which leads to a conservation strategy? What would a conservation strategy look like for Golden Mahseer in Bhutan? So in order to work on these questions, we formed a partnership, the Fisheries Conservation Foundation, formed a partnership with World Wildlife Fund in Bhutan and the Ministry of Agriculture and Forests to just collect some basic information on Mahseer and to see what we could learn to help drive this conservation strategy. So really a biologist's dream to go into a country and work on a species where hardly anything was known about its migration patterns or basic life history. And so we really had to start with basic questions. We had to say, what are the migration patterns? How far do they go? Where, when, and where do they spawn? And where do they overwinter? Because none of this was known prior to our work. So for our study area, we chose the largest river system, the largest watershed, which is the Manas Basin. You can see there, it takes up pretty much half of the country. And here is a close-up of the river system from Google Earth. So you can see the Manas River down here. Two rivers come in to form this at the confluence. And one thing I want you to notice, this is right at the southern part of the country. So right when the mountains end, India begins, but nothing is blocking the fish from swimming into India. So this was a big question, is do all the Mahseer just swim into India during the winter, or are they staying in Bhutan, which of course is a big conservation question for the country. So that was, this overwintering question was quite interesting. So as you can see, these two large rivers come in and lots of tributaries coming off in this watershed. To address this problem, to really answer the questions, we use the method of radio telemetry and tracking the fish, because all these places are hard to get to. So you really need the fish out there swimming and a way to collect the data without us being there. So in this method, you have a transmitter tag. That transmitter tag is surgically implanted into the fish and released. And then as it swims along the river, it swims by a receiver station. The receiver station consists of an antenna that picks up the signal of a transmitter tag as the fish swims by. That data is then stored in a receiver. It's powered by a battery. So you build receiver stations that then makes an array. And in a river, it's great because fish can only swim, up or down. So you can record that. In a lake, it's a little more complicated, but in a river, the system is pretty straightforward. So methods are pretty easy, right? We go out, we construct our receiver stations, we capture Mahseer using angling, we surgically implant them with transmitters, and then we download the data, right? So pretty straightforward and easy in most places in the world, but in Bhutan, here is the challenge. The landscape is just really punishing. So first, there are the roads. As you can see, there are no straight lines. There are no roads that have a straight line. Just very, very few places in the country. And so getting anywhere just takes a really long time. Once we track the miles per hour, and the average miles per hour on a 2-week trip was 17 miles per hour. So, just, really, really difficult logistics. And, you know, the roads are high up, and yes, that is a road carved into the cliff there. The roads are high up and the rivers are, you know, are far below. So getting to the river is quite a challenge. And then you've got a lot of equipment, and, you know, there's not, there are not roads sometimes where you need to go. So this is, you know, this is the landscape of what you have to work in carrying your equipment down to the river. And as our study went on, we expanded our receiver stations to some of the side tributaries, and then we had to use horses to pack equipment in. So just not easy to build a receiver station, but we did it. We got the work done. I will say Bhutanese are very, you know, this is their landscape. So walking 4 hours into a river is nothing for them. It's pretty, they are a walking culture. So they just aren't daunted by this at all. And so we did get our receiver stations built. This shows 2 of them that, you know, receiver stations have to be close to the water. The antennas have to have a clear line of sight. So that's the important part about placement there. So each of the receiver stations, as I said, have an antenna. Here is DK, our ranger. He was our tree climber to get our antennas all set. And then once you have the receiver station set in your array all set up, then you need to catch monsieur. We used angling. This really is the most gentle way to catch a fish. A large monsieur. It keeps them healthy. If you use nets, it does too much damage to the system. And we really want to keep these fish as healthy and as in good shape as possible. So angling was the method to collect these fish. But interestingly, especially in the areas where monsieur are most populated, recreational angling is unknown. People there had never even seen a fishing rod, and our team in Bhutan had never used a fishing rod. And so here is DK, one of our rangers. This is the first time he ever held a fishing rod, and here I am with one of the local officials. So this was one of the unexpected things that we had to really work on, was teaching people how to fish. And catching monsieur by a rod and reel, whether you use fly fishing or spin casting, is pretty difficult. Many hours out trying to catch these fish. But over time we got pretty good, and certainly our Bhutanese were amazing. They worked very, very hard at becoming great fishermen, and they did. They quickly surpassed us and our ability to catch fish. And so here's a sample of the Golden Mahseer in Bhutan. And one of the interesting things is the color pattern, the color variation. They always have this golden tail with this little red dot on the caudal fin, but the body itself can really range in coloration. So after we catch a fish, then we perform surgery. We have these mobile surgery stations that we either raft in or carry with us. And the first step in surgery is to anesthetize the fish. So we put the fish to sleep, and then the goal is to keep it as fast as possible, as quick as possible, and keep the fish in as good as condition as possible. So as you can see, there's a tube running into the fish's mouth. This is keeping the gills wet and really keeping the water oxygenated for that fish. And surgery really lasts, if once you get good at it, is 3 or 4 minutes. So here is a close-up. Here's the transmitter tag. There on the left, we use large transmitter tags. You can certainly use smaller ones for smaller fish, but we were focusing on adult migration for this study. And so you just insert the fish into the body cavity and then suture it up. The fish, or the tags, don't add weight to the fish. They're neutrally buoyant. So, and the body cavity has plenty of room for these fish, or for these tags. So that really isn't a problem for these fish. We had Mahseer are pretty hardy fish, so they really handled the surgery just fine. After surgery, then we put them in recovery. We let them fully recover from the anesthesia, hold them in the river, and make sure that they are fully awake and ready to go. And then after that, we release the fish. So really now we just wait, right? We wait until we have some data, and we would have to visit the receiver stations to download the data. And so after every 3 or 4 months, we would send a team out to download that data so we could put the story together. So for each fish, we could record its movement patterns. So every time it swam along one of those receiver stations, that fish would be picked up. So we would know the pattern, the migration pattern of each individual fish. We then can collectively take all that data and see what the migration patterns of the populations were. So to really put together this story of where the fish were moving and where they were going. So now I'm going to walk you through the array, the receiver array, and what we found for the migration pattern. So to remind you, this is the watershed. There's 3 different parts. There's the 2 rivers that come down, the Mangdechu on the left, the Dongmechu on the right. They have the confluence then that forms the Manas River. The Manas River does flow into India. Here is the array of our receiver stations. Each one of the orange boxes, the orange squares, is a receiver station. There are 2 dams on this system. One is far up in the Mangdechu. That dam was just being constructed. This was just at outside the range of the Mahseer. We didn't know. That was one of the big questions. Do Mahseer travel up as far as that dam was being built? And so we did have a receiver station up there to see if that was true. The second dam is the Kurichu. This is an older dam. This was actually built in the 1980s. And we wanted to know, this was already possibly blocking a migration route. So we had a receiver station right at that dam too, to see if Mahseer were coming up to that dam. And then just to give you a guide of river miles of the distance that these fish could be swimming. So from the border up to our most northern receiver station on the right, on the Dongmechu, is about 100 river kilometers. And then on the left, from the border up to the Chamkarchu. The Chamkarchu is a quite large tributary and one of the first major ones. So it's about 40 river kilometers on the right. So that gives you an idea of river distance when we're looking at these at the fish migration. Okay, so now I'm going to walk you through what the migration story is for this population. So this is a culmination of all of the tracking data for the individual fish and what it looks like for the population. So December, January, and February, the fish are all in the lower part of the watershed. Right, these are the winter months. The fish are all down in the deep waters, the slow waters, the Manas River. So below the confluence, it's not fast, rapid water. This is slow, deep, wide river of the Manas. Then in March, April, and May, we begin to see the fish moving north. So as they swim up the Manas River, they hit that confluence. There's a decision to be made, right? They either go right up into the Dongmechu or they go left into the Mangdechu River. And it's quite an important decision, right? The Mangdechu has a long, large rapid right at that confluence. And so, it's energetically costly to say, to make a switch and a decision there. So you've noticed I have 2 different colors here. And what we found is that there are really 2 distinct populations. So once a fish decided to go up the Dongmechu, or when a fish decided to go up to the Dongmechu, or we tracked a fish up there, it always went up the Dongmechu, right? Or, vice versa. Once fish swam left up the Mangdechu, it always went up the Mangdechu. So 2 distinct populations. We never had fish switch or saw a fish, a tagged fish, make a different decision. They always stuck with their river. So interesting there really two distinct and some homing behavior there on the river choice. The other interesting thing is when they decided to move. Before, it was really believed that fish waited until the first rains to make their big, long migrations. But we are seeing fish moving up into the main channels much earlier. March is the lowest water season, right? So it's before the snow melt, and it's certainly before the monsoons start. So really low water in that area, or in these rivers. Then June, July, and August, the fish now are way up into the watershed and high up into the rivers. This is the area, or the time when the monsoons are really starting, right? They're big rains. And remember what I said, just a huge amount of water level fluctuations with the monsoons. And sometimes you hear about the huge floods in the monsoons in India and Bhutan. So these fish are really navigating that flooding season. So in the summer, fish are way up spread out throughout the watershed. Not all fish migrate 100 kilometers, but many do. So it just depends on where their spawning tributaries are. Now we had fish go up to the Sherichu, that's 100 kilometers, river miles up. We had them pass that. So we actually don't know how far up they went, but we think it's about 800 elevation, 800 meters to 1,000 meters is really the limit in these rivers. And then sorry. Okay, then in September, October, November, the fish begin to move down. So as the water levels are receding, as it's getting colder, the fish are migrating down into the lower part of the watershed. And then by December, January, February, they are all down in the lowest part in the Manas River. So this is really the overwintering area where they are collected. So just to give you a picture of what the tributaries look like. So this is a pretty common tributary. Sometimes there's a higher elevation where they swim up, but this would be a standard tributary, a spawning tributary. So on the, this is really showing the water flow in March when the fish are beginning their migration up. And so they aren't migrating up in the tributaries at March because, as you can see, it's really low water. But what they do, they are in the main channel right outside, right at the edge of the tributary. So on the right here, you can see the water flow. You've got warm water flowing into the colder main channel, and you can see that dark area. It's clear water. And we are across the river up on a cliff. And if you look with binoculars, it's that area is just packed with really large mahseer. So we don't even really need to track them to know that they're there, because they are just, they are all just hanging out there. So they use these warm waters flowing in as staging grounds, and then wait to go up into the tributary to spawn after the rains and the water has risen in the tributaries. So really key habitat area for mahseer. Another interesting thing that we found was that each tributary, that fish went back to the same tributary year after year after year. So not only did they choose their same river system, but they also homed back to the same tributary. And this is pretty significant when you start thinking about conservation actions and a strategy for these fish. And we actually have some preliminary genetic data that shows that this may be natal homing, right? That if you were spawned in that tributary, that may be the tributary that you return to as an adult. And so really fascinating. This hadn't really been shown before in Golden Mahseer. and you'll notice here in the Curricu that we had the fish return to the Curricu right below the dam. So what we don't know is are those fish trying to get to their tributaries above the dam? Are they still trying year after year after year? And remember, this dam was in the, went online, I believe, in the late 80s. So pretty interesting that those fish are showing up below the dam. The other thing to mention here too is that Mahseer are long-lived species, right? They will live, we don't really know how long. We're actually doing an aging study right now. But even if they live 20, 25, 30 years, like many of the carp species, you really don't know that you're in trouble unless you're tracking the recruitment and life history, because you'll have adults in the system for a long, long time. So really important to start to measure the recruitment and the activities that are going on in these tributaries. So remember, one of the questions was, do fish leave Bhutan and swim into India during the winter, right? The Manas flows right into Bhutan, or right into India, as you can see here from this Google Earth map. So the yellow line is the border with India. And nothing is stopping fish from swimming, but a couple things. You can see pretty quickly that the landscape changes dramatically, right? These are flat plains. The river starts to braid out. And this is pretty common for all of the rivers in Bhutan. Once the rivers leave Bhutan, they enter India and they really start to braid. And so you have a big change in habitat, just the structure of the river habitat, and big change in temperature, right? These aren't forested areas. So whether fish historically went into India, it's completely unknown, but our studies show that really only a few fish crossed into India. We had a receiver station right at the border. We don't know how far in they swam into India, but very few went. 3 returned out of those 6, and so we just assumed the other 3 probably were harvested. But the point is the majority of fish stayed in Bhutan. So our big takeaways here for our migration patterns were that fish were moving upstream well before water levels rose in the summer. And this is important for conservation, and especially important for when you're working to mitigate for development and dams, is E-flows are now calculated for rivers and fish for what is the amount of water that's needed. And so these fish are now moving up at the lowest water. And so this has, implications for E-flows and keeping enough water in the river, even for irrigation or, any water use that you may be challenging the water levels in the rivers. And then they do not return downstream after the monsoons. They don't travel back and forth to spawn. They don't finish spawning and then come right back down. They are up into high up into the watersheds during the whole season. They don't return until winter times. And then this homing behavior, returning to the same tributaries, to the same rivers. So if you have a block in their migration route or an impact in their migration route, what do those fish do? Do they change? Do they try to get to their tributary and then they can't, and so they adjust? This is a big question. We actually have a current project in Pakistan looking at this very question, where a dam blocked the migration pattern, and now we are looking to see what fish do above the dam versus below the dam. But this homing behavior, really important part of their life history. And then the critical habitats. Where are the areas that you need to focus for a conservation strategy? So not surprising, this was known before, tributaries are just an incredibly important part of their critical habitat. So, staging, like I said, they just hang outside the tributaries. So these are very vulnerable. If you have a lot of fish just hanging outside of the mouth of the tributary, they're vulnerable for illegal fishing. But then the tributaries themselves, the health of the tributary for spawning and nursery areas. You go up into the tributaries and you can see juvenile fish there. So, very, very important. And then the overwintering areas, just a massive amount of high concentration of fish. It's just really incredible the amount of fish that that these overwintering areas are. And in Bhutan, in the south, that's where all the overwintering areas are going to be. They're not going to be up where the water is fast with these rapids. You really need a deep, slow area. So, certainly in the Mana system, this is important as we look at other rivers and begin to really assess the other rivers in Bhutan. This will be an important question. And we are thinking as we look at the landscape that most of these fish are staying in India, but of course we have to look at each of these river systems separately. But the main point here is that their conservation is really up to Bhutan and their protection. You can't pass it on thinking, well, they leave our country, so we don't have to worry about them. So what impacts has this research had in this country? This has been a really exciting project because often you work on a research project and then you really don't see the impact until more into the future or at all. You just don't know how it affected the country. But because of the pressure to build dams, because of the religious significance of this fish, and because it's just a really revered fish, among the region, it got a lot of attention, and people were very, very curious. So as we did our study, World Wildlife Fund funded a filmmaker to come out with us and produce a documentary. You can watch this documentary. It's on YouTube. You can just search Tiger of the River, and you can find it. But what they did is they showed this on TV, on national TV a few times, and the locals began to really learn about both our work and the significance of our work, and really finding out or learning about why it's important to conserve the Golden Mahseer. And you wonder, well, this was shown on TV a few times, is this really noticed? But then as we traveled around and people learned, they're like, oh, I saw you on TV, I saw the documentary. And so this was just a really great educational tool for spreading the word and getting locals to learn about Mahseer. This is Bhutan for Life is an effort that was really championed by World Wildlife Fund. Because it's a poor country, conservation efforts and capacity building for conservation just wasn't there. So Bhutan for Life is this program that is built to fund national parks and protection of Bhutan. It's a huge effort, multi-million dollars, that really was worked on to build this conservation fund. Before this, the work on Mahseer had really been done, the focus was mainly on wildlife species, on tigers and birds and red pandas. They have these flagship species that they were building conservation plans. And through the work that really highlighted Mahseer, now Mahseer are considered one of the flagship species, and a conservation strategy is being built as part of this Bhutan for Life. So not that they were really ignoring fish, but really just not enough was known. And so we feel really proud that we are making Golden Mahseer equal to tigers and some of the other wildlife in Bhutan, and really thinking about them in the same way. And then some of the other larger efforts is we have the International Mahseer Conference that was held in 2018. This brought a lot of biologists and researchers into the country. And now this is going to be a standard conference that will happen every few years. It happened in Chiang Mai in 2020. So this is really a regional effort to really highlight all Mahseer in the region. Of course, then COVID hit, and that plan that put a whole wrench in the in the conference every 2 years, but we are hoping that this will pick back up once the pandemic is over and people are allowed to travel. And then finally, Bhutan is hungry for outside economic resources. And as I mentioned, Golden Mahseer are really a prized sport fish. So we are working with the government to build a recreational program and based on community conservation. So if community members can really see that a live Golden Mahseer is worth much, much more than something on a plate, that this can really drive the conservation. And so we are working on that. It's as I said, the populations there are pretty incredible. You can see that these fish are large and can really provide a pretty amazing opportunity for a fly fisherman. So that is in the works. And so finally, just want to bring in this connection of fish and people. So our foundation really believes in the tenet that if your fish populations are healthy, your water is healthy, and then people are healthy. And this balance for Bhutan is really a challenge of how do they protect their fisheries and yet provide a future for their children that can be sustainable and whole. And so with that, then I will take any questions.
Thanks a lot, Julie. That was a really great journey, and it really makes me miss the northern part of India, where I'll be going soon. Yeah. We have quite a lot of questions, so I'm just going to get started. Are there any natural predators of the Golden Mahseer?
There aren't any predators in the water. They are the top predator, but there are otters, and so that is really the biggest predator. Is otters can come in and they're pretty. They're the giant river otters. They can. They'll prey on fish. We've watched it happen. I think there are some stories of tigers grabbing a mahseer, but that would just be here or there, but for the most part they don't have any large predators that impact the population other than humans.
Right. And is there any influence from China and Bhutan regarding building dams, bridges, roads? I mean, I know there is, but I had an add-on question to this, is that does the Bhutanese government consider hydropower renewable? Because I know that's controversial whether hydropower can be considered renewable, or because its impact on emissions is now also recorded as significant as well as conservation devastation.
Right. Yeah, there's a whole other webinar on that issue. Yes, there have been a lot of promises made in the hydropower industry. And first I'll tackle the sustainable part of it. Lots of promises. And so early on, I mean, if you look at the early environmental impact statements, they literally say, this won't hurt your wildlife. The fish will be fine. We'll build a fish ladder. The fish will be able to move around without even understanding what the biology and the life history of these migratory fish are. So lots of false promises there. And there continue to be false promises in the cost and certainly in the greenness of a hydropower. That's a whole different question. There are a lot of people working to right those injustices. There is not a huge influence from China, but that is growing. But where the large dams are built and financed are from India. So right now, all of the dams are being financed through India. That relationship just continues to change and grow and be assessed differently. COVID put a huge, just because of the impacts of COVID on the economy, there's going to be a lot of pressure to continue building hydropower. But there's also a lot of pressure on the impacts because now they have built 2 or 3 of these large modern dams and really seen the massive amount of construction that it takes and the years and the cost. one of their dams actually, it may never go on commission because it was just built in an area that keeps having issues. And so they've learned a lot, and moving forward, it will just be a big question. I think the more that we can offer, it doesn't help to go in to say you can't build dams. That just doesn't help. But if you can go in and say, if you are going to build a dam, then let's look at how we can address the impacts. Where you build it can be very important for fish biodiversity. Where you build it can be very important on social impacts. How large you build it, all those questions. So we're at least trying to throw in the balance on the environmental side when those.
Yeah, that's pretty good to know. Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, geopolitically speaking, smaller countries like Nepal, Bhutan, or even Sri Lanka become like pawns between China and India, and who can exert more influence on these smaller countries.
Okay, that is right. Very delicate. Very delicate politics there. Yeah.
Alan Hildrew asked, "Hi, Alan. Did you use barbless hooks to catch the fish?"
Yeah. Yes, we did. We did. And that, one, we just wanted to keep the fish as healthy as possible. And that's why it was really hard to catch these fish. Barbless hooks makes a challenge. So really, the more skilled we became at anglers, the better we got at it. But yes, we did use barbless hooks, and we promote that for fishing as well.
Right. Louis Norman asks, what temperature range is experienced in the waters inhabited by the Golden Mahseer?
So that's a good question. I have to think back. So I would say in the upper ranges, they were 14, 15 degrees. And in the south, I would say the range would be, between 18 and 14. These are glacier fed water rivers, so they don't get, really, really warm. Yeah.
Rajendra Jagdale from India has said that they have spotted in Manas River many times, and they have also done captive rearing of Mahseer in high altitude mountain regions between Mumbai and Pune. That's just a comment. There's another question from Martin.
If you don't mind, I can just comment on that. So we believe that the hatchery production of Mahseer, when you take into the account that they have this homing behavior, hatchery, it's interesting when you produce a Mahseer in a hatchery versus a wild fish, how well those hatchery fish will do in the wild. And I think this is something that really needs to be assessed. Hydropower will come in and say, it's okay, we're going to build a dam because we'll build a hatchery. And we are really trying to educate the powers that be that this may not be the best mitigation or even a mitigation option because of that life history and migratory behavior of these fish. And when you produce them in the hatchery, they actually just may be a different type of fish, a type of Mahseer. So really caution against hatcheries as the answer for conservation.
Yeah, it's definitely not the answer. I remember at one point when there was there still is a huge dam building exercise in India, and they would just say, oh, but we have a fish ladder, without actually knowing whether it's being used. It's the same as building a road. Oh, we'll make a bridge for the elephants. But animals are not like water. They don't go where you want them to go.
Yes.
Martin asks, how many fish were tracked?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mention that. So we had 65 Golden Mahseer tracked. We also, I didn't talk about this, we also tracked chocolate Mahseer, which are migratory fish. They're not a tour species, but they they look similar, and they are migratory. So we had a total of 110 fish, but 64, 65 of them were Mahseer.
I think you have sort of answered this in your presentation, but was the distribution of fish even over the rivers, or were there hotspots? There were hotspots, as you showed, between the tributaries and the main rivers, right? Roger Heath has an interesting question. Is there a flagship plant for Bhutan?
Is there a flagship?
plant?
Plant. Yes. Yes, there is. I believe it's the gentian. I believe it's the wild gentian. I'll have to check on that. There is one. They do have. They do have a national plant, a flower.
The thing is that Martin says that the Himalayan blue poppy might be one.
Oh yes, maybe that's it. Yeah, yeah. I got gentian blue poppy. Yes, it's the blue poppy. Yes, right.
We have a lot of botanists in our membership, and it's a little bit of a sticking point.
Oh my gosh! So just for the botanists, the rhododendrons in Bhutan are spectacular. I am not a plant person, but even I had to start learning my plants when I was in Bhutan because it's just the rhododendrons are amazing. Yeah.
Are these migration habits typical for migratory fish? If not, what unique habitats have you discovered, and how effective are these kind of studies in siting dams and managing water flows? Has policy listened to you, or have they changed the way they do things?
Well, I like to think they're listening to us. But the reason that Bhutan is so unique is that this fish has this religious and cultural significance. And so what we try to press upon them, that if they don't pay attention, that their populations can dwindle. If they put a dam on every river, their populations could suffer dramatically. And do they want to be the generation that causes the Golden Mahseer, which is an auspicious symbol in their religion, to, do they want to be that generation that causes that? That you have to really think ahead, you have to have this long range planning, and that it's really part of their gross national happiness mandate, that, Mahseer provide many cultural services and ecological services. And so that can't be ignored. I completely understand the pressure for economic development, but there are other ways the country can develop its economy. There is a whole group working on regenerative agriculture and ways to build the Bhutanese economy outside of hydropower. And so there is pressure, they are listening, but when you're a poor country, and as you said, there's two giants on each side that are offering an incredible amount of services. It's just hard. But I think that if we can show that especially for Mahseer, if there can be community conservation and economic value, that it will make a difference.
Yeah, and possibly also be compensated for conservation of large tracts of virgin forest land.
Right. I think this is true for, whether it's Bhutan, Nepal, India, is just to keep asking the question, do we want a world where there are no free flowing rivers? And some people may say yes, but I think the majority of people will say, well, no, we do want free flowing rivers. We don't want, 50 years down the road to have no free flowing rivers. So if your answer is, whatever your answer is, you just have to think about how you're going to navigate that in the future.
Yeah. John Craig asked, do the juveniles move with the adults for a certain timing? Is that how they?
Yeah, so I didn't address juvenile behavior or recruitment. So we know, the question is we don't know very much. So we know that the Mahseer spawn, they lay their eggs up in the tributaries, and that these eggs hatch, and then the juveniles are hatch in the tributaries. What they do from there is really unknown. Do they stay up in the tributaries until 1 or 2 years? Do they come down into the main channel? There's lots of evidence, in fact, that the biologists in India say no, they're in the main channel. We find them in the main channel. In Bhutan, we haven't seen them, but it's so difficult to sample, it's really hard to know. We do see them up in the tributary, but we haven't seen huge numbers of them yet. So all of that is to say that is a whole area that is really unknown. And we're just trying to get funds to do more of this research, because until you really understand your recruitment and your and assess year classes, well, you know the health of your population. Like I said, you can see adults, but they're long lived. If you aren't seeing the little guys, then you're in trouble. So,
right. There's a technical question. Could one use satellite tags, possibly generating more detailed data without having to build receiving stations?
Yeah, so there's different ways to track fish, and satellite tags are one way. Satellite tags are mainly used in ocean systems. It doesn't really work in river systems. It's too shallow, and also it just, especially in this country where you got very, very steep valleys, you can't. It's difficult to track tags after with the satellite. There just is too many areas where they can't be picked up with the satellite, and also it's really expensive. Our tags cost about $175 each. Satellite tags cost like $2,000 each. So it's there's also acoustic, but acoustic on transmitters, which is a little more straightforward. But those receivers are in the water, and when you got fast rivers, it's just too much noise. So we need to use land-based receivers.
Yeah. Could you say something more about the spawning? How long do the progeny remain in tributaries?
Yeah, so we don't know much about the spawning. We, first of all, I've never been there during the monsoon season. It's so at least in Bhutan, any observations are done by our rangers, but it's turbulent water, the water's high, it's not clear. So we will, they have sent videos of big fish up in the tributaries, but but as far as spawning behavior, how long they stay up there, it's all unknown. And like I said, same with the hatching, all that. There just hasn't been some really good scientific work there, just because it's so difficult. I will say that during the monsoon, at least in Bhutan, the tributaries fill with water when it rains, but then they quickly recede. So they are always going up and down. So we're pretty sure that the Mahseer aren't staying up in the smaller tributaries. They go up, they spawn, and then they return to the main channel.
Some interest in fish ladders and questions is, are they known to improve the well-being of populations when dams are built? Do they work at all? Do they work on some species?
The mitigation, you mean the fish ladders? So really, in the US, there, we've had dams for 150 years, and they have really figured out how fish ladders work with salmon. And of course, salmon have this huge economic value, right? So there's lots of billions of dollars spent on that. In Mahseer, in Asia, dams are relatively newer, and so to build a good fish ladder, you have to understand the biology of the fish that are using the ladder. And so often what happens is you say, okay, we're going to build a ladder for Mahseer, without thinking there can be other migratory fish, right? And so that work really has not been done. It's being worked on, but a fish ladder that is built specifically for Mahseer doesn't really exist yet that has been successful. The other thing is fish ladders are one way, right? It works great for salmon because, they only go one way and then they go upstream and die. Fish in Asia, no matter what species they are, they travel up and down. So you have to have a fish ladder that they can get up the river and then they can get back down. And that doesn't exist. So even if you can get your fish upriver, it doesn't matter unless they can get back down. So that is, it's just fish passage is a very, very difficult thing to make work for the whole fish community. There is a fish ladder at the Kurichu. Some fish use it. They see snow trout, they see some of the Garo species in there. Whether it's successful, it's just a question. But the fish ladder that was actually built was actually Atlantic salmon ladder, and those are for fish that jump. Mahseer don't jump; they power through the rapids. So, yeah,
very different things. But
very different thing. Yeah, if if you hear that a promise of a fish ladder will help the fish migration, just question it quite a bit. Lots of issues there.
And one last thing, this is a good question to close this. What's the best way to visit Bhutan to possibly see the fish and support conservation of it?
Yes, yes. So, so as I said, Bhutan is first of all, it is worth a trip because it is truly just the most unique place you will visit. There are no Starbucks, there are no Taco Bells, there are no subways. The outside influence does not exist. You go there and you really see what the country looked like. If you get into the villages, you can step back, 200 years and you won't know any difference. Although you do see monks walking around with cell phones now, so there are signs of modern life there. But okay, so getting to Bhutan, you have to go through a guide or a travel agency. The interesting thing to know is they have a tourist tax. So when a tourist comes, you have a minimum of $250 a day that you have to have. Now, that includes your guide, that includes your hotel, that includes your food. So it's really not that exorbitant, but they do track it. And each person that comes in is expected to spend $250 a day for their services. And that really supports the tourist industry and keeps the value high. So for that $250 a day, your expectations is you will get a good, you will get a very good guide, you'll get adequate and they'd say 3-star and above facilities. So your experience is rich for that as well. So it's really a agreement between the tourist and the government. And it's easy to, there's many tours, there's many guides. I've got, some really good guide friends that I'm happy to pass that information along. And they have expanded. Before it was really cultural. So you went to the zongs, the big temples, and you went to festivals. But now they are really building their ecotourism. So there's birding tours and other wildlife tours that are taking you more into the heart of this kind of country, and that has really expanded as well. And so that is where we, as the recreational fishing interest, can see that as the ecotourism builds, that we can build this recreational fishery that then will bring money to the local communities. And so it's not difficult, it's a bit expensive, but you can find a range of activities that that will sort of fit what you want to see.
I'm glad I don't have to pay the $250 because I'm still South Asian.
Yes, you.
But thank you so much, Julie, for the snapshot and for this lunchtime lecture. Really, it was everything I hoped for. And for everybody else, Julie is very accessible through her email and her Twitter account. If you have any questions, I'm sure she'll be happy to answer.
Yes.
Thank you. Have a great rest of the day.
Okay, thank you so much.
Bye.